So why not let's begin with Trump, right? So the Trump 2.0 now has officially already second months. So can you give us a sense of what his policies really are and where he's heading and what the implications are for the American sort of domestic politics, particularly the midterm election?
Sure.
Going forward. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, I think you have to start with that because there are so many things about Trump and what his administration is doing that don't fit under the normal heading of economic rationality or predictability. So he's kind of broken all of the traditional ground rules. So when I think of Trump, I kind of go back to three different time eras that have a very different personality. So if you take Trump 1.0 when he got elected, which kind of surprised everybody when he beat Hillary Clinton. And if you look back on his first version, he didn't really know anything about politics and how it worked. So he went a fairly traditional route and picked cabinet members and built alliances with traditional power players. And that created real guardrails because when you've got somebody coming in Secretary of State or Treasury or whatever it is, you're dealing with pretty big institutional backgrounds and norms that he was very much subject to, which he kind of resisted. The other thing I think during 1.0 is you had the impact of COVID. So while he likes to say that he was a savior in COVID because he brought in the vaccines at warp speed, the reality is there were probably hundreds of thousands of American deaths that were attributable to his ineptness for the first 6 to 9 months in dealing with COVID. Because he basically said, this is just like the flu, we don't have to worry about it. He even at one point said maybe people should think about injecting themselves with a disinfectant and that might kill. So it took quite a while for him to get to kind of a wake-up period. So he came out of that, I think that first term with a fair number of questions on the part of people's minds in terms of how competent is he really, what impact did he really have, and then we all know he lost the 2020 election. And he just couldn't deal with that. So we went through the next era, which was him doing everything he could to fight to basically retain power. So the first thing he did was he said, I never lost the election. It was riddled with fraud. But there were over 60 court cases. Every single one basically said you presented no factual evidence. So then he was frustrated that he couldn't get the legal system to change. So he then organized basically the January 6th riots, where the intent was to get his supporters to basically interrupt the normal transfer of power to Biden. And he fought that all the way and was very much in denial. And then you had all the legal initiatives against him, where he took basically classified documents and against the law, retained them at his home. You had the interference in the election in Georgia, where he tried to substitute other fake electors in the process. So he came out of that whole process, having lost the election, very bitter in particular at the legal system, and also feeling that he did not have the right team in place. So now you go to the third period, which is basically his re-election. And there were a couple of basic lessons learned for him from the first two. I think the first was, do not focus as you build your team, the cabinet and otherwise, on competence. Focus entirely on loyalty. So if you look at a number of his key cabinet choices, the people by any measure were highly unqualified. So you have, as an example, Pete Highsmith, whatever his name is, who's the Secretary of Defense. He had never managed a budget in his life. This was the first budget he ever had, and it was over $900 billion. His only experience in the military was as a combatant in Iran and Iraq. So he had no experience in how do you manage a military operation? How do you think about how much you're going to spend on what kind of weapons, what your security priorities are, et cetera. For national intelligence, he picks a woman who had been openly supportive of Russia in the past. For Attorney General, his first candidate was Matt Gaetz, who basically was under indictment for a number of personal actions that were, quote, illegal. So he went through a period of basically saying, I'm going to pick people who will always support me no matter what. So that was one very fundamental change. Fundamental change number two was he didn't like any dimension of the normal balance of power, especially the judiciary, which he viewed as having launched a witch hunt against him and cost him an awful lot of money and was frankly very embarrassing. So I think he went into the second term with the idea that he wasn't going to let the legal system get in his way. And I think what he's starting to do is just overwhelm the legal system with almost daily executive powers that were being issued, and the legal community said, A, we need time to really study these because the things you're doing are very out of the norm, but they're generally coming back and saying, we don't think you're going to be able to do that. So it had to do with deporting people without going through due process. It had to do with slashing the costs of the federal government with Elon Musk, where people were basically being summarily fired without going through any of their rights that they had as civil servants. So you had a declaration of war on the legal system, and we're really in the middle of that right now. So we're waiting to see, now that a lot of his actions have been put on pause, what is the legal community actually going to do when he says, you've given me an order, even at the Supreme Court level, I'm not going to follow it, and I'm going to challenge you to see whether you can do anything about it. And that's going to be a real test of democracy because obviously the legal system is pretty foundational. So you went to a model where he went from having real guardrails to no guardrails. And then if you look at what he promised in the election, which he refers to as a mandate, but at the end of the day, he was elected by 2%. So if you go back in history, 2% on the popular vote is one of the smallest margins of victory that we've had in our history. But he positions it as, we have a mandate and therefore everything we're doing is in the people's best interest, and I'm simply giving them what they want. But one quote he had, which I think is very telling, he said, anything that I choose to do that's in the government's best interest is by definition legal, which is a way of saying I'm above the law. So the other thing I think he decided he didn't like is to be constrained by relationships globally. So rather than thinking about Western Europe as his primary ally, and a lot of the global organizations like the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, he basically said, I don't have to pay attention to any of those norms. And so, we've kind of gone through a situation where there are two overarching characteristics that drive his behavior. The first is power, and that's why he wants to undermine the legal system and why he's doing so many things that are outside of any norm. And what he's really doing is testing the legal system in terms of, are they going to be able to get in the way of me doing what I want to do? And so that obviously is a pretty fundamental change. He's reorganizing the global order and basically minimizing the role of NATO and really raising into question whether the core of NATO, which is Article 5, which is is attacked, everyone will respond. And now you read what a lot of people in NATO are saying is, we don't trust them to respond to that and recognize it. He's also going against historic allies like Mexico and Canada, which are the two biggest trading partners, and he's going at them with crippling tariffs. And so he's making some fundamental changes from an economic point of view that I think are going to turn out to be highly unsuccessful. So if you go back and simplify what the American people want from Trump, they want a flattening or a lowering of the cost of the standard of living as measured by something as simple as, when I go shopping, can I afford my grocery bill? So he's kind of started out with the idea that tariffs are an important tool because he's a bully, and this is a way for him to unilaterally strike out at other people. But he's not buying into what all the economists are saying, which is tariffs raise costs. So if you look at his key initiatives, there's 3 of them, and every one of them is going to increase cost of living. So the first is tariffs, and we haven't seen that play out yet because the tariffs are relatively young and people are still revisiting supply chains. But at the end of the day, cost of living is going inevitably to go up. It's not going to go down. The second one is his pledge to deport millions of illegal aliens who were undocumented. But when you think about it from an economic point of view, most of these immigrants from Central and South America are hardworking, paid well below what any traditional American citizen would get paid. So when you look at what the farmers are saying, what the hotel workers companies are saying, they're all saying our prices are going to have to go up to account for the cost of replacing people who get paid $8 an hour with people who get paid $20 an hour. So that's also going to push up inflation. And then his third priority is I want to cut taxes further for the wealthiest, which is also going to put pressure economically. So one of the real underlying challenges here is he does not understand how economics work. So I think what's highly likely is we're going to get to the midterm elections, and the people who are basically expecting him to improve their economic lot are going to realize from the numbers and from their own experience when they go shopping, it's not happening. And we're already starting to see that because the Republicans in the red states are relying increasingly, are getting frustrated, and they're relying on town halls to speak out. Well, the first couple of town halls that were done in red states led to a huge uproar against the Republican Party, to the point where the party said to Republican representatives, do not go to these town halls. It's going to be bad optics. So what the Democrats are doing, which is very smart, Bernie Sanders is now going to Republican town halls and getting a standing ovation because he's simply telling the people the truth. You voted for him for these reasons, and everything he's doing is exactly going to have the opposite effect. So I think he's in a very shaky position. I think he's going to increasingly understand that, and it's going to lead him to do very erratic things. So as an example, in the area of deporting illegal aliens, somebody said, well, you're referring to a law from 1798 that was only put into action 3 times in our country's history, and it can only be applied during times of war or invasion. And what the courts are saying is there's no evidence that that is happening today, therefore you can't apply that law. He responded by saying, I'm not familiar with that law. And then someone said, well, you actually signed an executive order, and here's a picture of what was asked, and you signing your name to it. And he said, that wasn't me. So we're really at the point where he is getting backed in the corners increasingly. And just yesterday, I don't know whether you saw this, he had a conversation with the newly elected president of Canada and said, having declared Canada will be our 51st state, he referred to the president not as the president of Canada, but as the governor, implying another state. So he realized, and then yesterday they had the opening day in baseball in Canada, and when they played the U.S. anthem, everyone booed. So I think he kind of said, well, wait a minute, that means they don't like me. So he gets on the phone with a new president of Canada and basically says, I think we're going to continue to be great partners. So you can imagine Canada, which has already been totally in an uproar, saying, what's going on? So we're also going to see increasingly irrational decisions being made by him and denial because he feels he has the power and the only one who can challenge him is the legal system, and he thinks he's going to win. I think he's going to lose badly. So that's kind of the backdrop, and I think the closer he gets to the midterm elections, where I think he's going to lose the House and lose the Senate, the more irrational he's going to get. And so unlike, most of politics, you can always say, well, people are reasonably educated and they're going to do what's in their best interest, which has kind of always been the Chinese model. We're going to see decisions that just catch people completely off guard. So you have to kind of start, and the last thing I should mention is, while his first priority is power, his second is revenge. So he is going after universities, he's going after media, he's going after the legal system, not only the courts, but law firms, and basically saying, I'm going to remove your security clearance, which means for big law firms, maybe a big chunk of what they do involves serving the government or issues involving the government. So they have so far capitulated, which is a terrible precedent. So the rest of the legal community is coming together and saying, he's going to pick us off one at a time, we better get ready to respond. So the amount of churn going on and angst almost daily, can't be overestimated. And it just creates a tone of irrationality that is different from anything we've ever seen. And my own feeling is he thinks he can get reelected a third term. Because it was actually an amendment to the Constitution, what you have to do to overturn an amendment to the Constitution, he could never have the political power to do. You need like 3/4 of the states, you need 2/3 of the Senate, it's never going to happen. So I think he's increasingly realized that this is his swan song, and so he's going to go out swinging. So that's kind of the cyclone that we're really in the middle of right now, which makes trying to make sense of where we are and where it's going is extremely difficult. So I take a course in lifetime learning, and the subject of one of the courses I'm taking is called, Is Democracy Worth Saving? And so we had a book and we were going through it in a very disciplined way. And finally the teacher said, all bets are off. So let's just put this book away because it's irrelevant given what's going on. So we basically are now redoing every class around what happened last week. And I think that's going to be true to a lot of people who were involved in teaching against historic norms that are just no longer relevant. So let me just leave that as kind of the world we're in today, which no one would have ever imagined we could get to, but we're there. And so with that backdrop, why don't we go through some of the specific questions?